for today, Bill, and then one person tentatively accepted.
Can you repeat that? You were breaking up a little bit, Lucas.
My bad. So yeah, I have 8 people accepted for today.
Okay. I just figure I'm gonna assign everybody a journal article or two just to read the abstract and conclusion and then summarize for the group, similar to what we did last time, just to kind of get everybody's um, feedback on the surveys. Thought that was a good technique that Jamie did last time. All right.
Hello,
Well,
everyone.
hi, Jamie. How you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing all right. I got my voice working again, so that's good.
Oh, goodness. Thank you.
Although it does make me cough every time I talk. So,
All right. I'll try and pick up the slack for you.
yeah.
So it's 3 o'clock, Lucas, and you said that 8 people had confirmed. That includes myself, Kelly, and Jamie.
I'm pretty sure that Tessa and Zach are not here today.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Sam, you're with your legislative aide, correct? You with the
No, I'm a clerk,
general.
but I'm here to back up Lucas.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're the
I'm just,
general counsel's office, right?
no, just I'm a clerk, I'm a clerk just like Lucas, but
Okay.
I'm just here to back up him, on just the recording and the YouTube live and everything, and that's
Oh,
it.
thank
Yeah,
you.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you for that.
You're welcome.
How long do you want to wait, Jamie?
Give it maybe 2 more minutes.
Okay.
This will be an intimate meeting.
Yes. Oh, there's Zach.
Maybe I had the dates wrong. When I logged in, Zoom wanted me to update. I actually took me a few minutes to get into Zoom.
Yeah, I skipped that and launched. Didn't know what it was
Not this,
doing.
this list of people that are here currently. I think we're only waiting for Brad who accepts it. So I think this may be it for the day.
Okay. All right, then let's get started. Um, so today, Bill is going to be leading the discussion. Just a reminder that we do have I'm going to post it into the chat here. I'll post it into the chat in just a second. But we do have our kind of running notes on the meeting, and then with it embedded within that is the link to the working report that we have going. Excuse me. I did not get as far as fleshing that out as I had hoped by this meeting. But I expect by our next meeting, a lot of the text in that document will start to be populated and sorted a bit better, formatted a bit better. We'll get in some of the images that we had discussed previously. So by our next meeting, which I think is the 19th, yep, that document should be looking much more robust. So you might be getting an email from me probably Monday or Tuesday of next week, just letting you know that that document is ready for some review. So I do have a cold, so Bill's going to do most of the talking today. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that our next meeting, we're going to be talking about engaging the community. So I just wanted to get your mind thinking on, those communication and outreach pieces. But it's not just in terms of what we want to tell people, but I think most of us on this call know that, to do effective communication, you need someone that is focused on that and has those skills. And so it's what kind of financial support do we need to do to support communication and outreach, and what might that look like? What seems like a proper thing to suggest? So in other words, I don't view communication and outreach as something that everybody can do and they should just do it on the side at the end of a project. But it's something that continues on throughout the life of a project. So just think about that. And I think Tessa and Zach are going to lead that discussion during our next meeting. And then our final meeting prior to the report kind of being wrapped up as this interim report, not interim, that's the wrong word. Wrapping up the report as it is right now. Our last meeting is basically just discussing and reviewing kind of what we included in the report, the recommendations that we made, and kind of agreeing as a group that is what we are interested in putting forward to the legislature, to the legislators to review. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. I'm glad you're still able to talk. Yeah, so today's topic is the survey, how surveys are conducted on eelgrass, my understanding. So we're going to look at what's going on not only in Long Island Sound, but what's going on around us. And I'll give a little background on why these surveys are really important and how surveying is actually a science unto itself. And it has a lot of constraints, including funding, personnel, and physical issues with each survey type. So what I thought is just I'll give you a reason why we're doing this. And then I really like Jamie's interactive methodology from the last meeting where you should have all gotten a copy of the outline that has some hyperlinks to different journal articles in it where you could just click. And all I'm expecting is just skim the abstract and then just go right down to the discussion or conclusion and just come up with a couple sentences of, did this type of survey work in this particular paper? And by no means is this an exhaustive literature review. I just was trying to grab relevant papers to each type of survey. And then we'll feed that back. And then we had a really good presentation, a couple of them actually. Kelly gave one at the Eelgrass Collaborative meeting that we had through the Connecticut NER. And there was also another one that was through the Massachusetts Coastal Program and their National Estuary Program. There was a woman there that was brought in to look at comparing 4 different styles of surveys that they had done in Massachusetts. And so they made a beautiful story map. And I'm going to run through that after we've got our minds into the survey world. So I'll just start with, I've done a lot of surveying in my life as a biologist, everything from moose surveys, trumpeter swan surveys, I've done sea lion surveys, mountain goat surveys, moose browse surveys. I've surveyed deer poop. I've surveyed um, spawning areas, for salmon, all kinds of surveys. And it's not just going out and counting something. You want to have something that is repeatable, that you can do for a long period of time to get trends. You want to be able to afford it. And you want it structured in such a way that if you do have survey gaps, you can fill them in with information that you get on either side of the survey. And so we should probably share. Should I share the screen, Lucas? Can I share?
Let me make you the host, Bill. So you
Okay.
be able to share, or at least a co-host. Okay. Let me know if that option is there.
Is this working here? Can you all see this? Okay.
Yes.
So this is our current, we've seen this graph before. It's a little bit small, but on the left-hand side are survey results of acreage in Long Island Sound. And the top line, even though it's small, is 2,000 acres. And so that was roughly our baseline, a little bit below that. So the goal is to essentially double that and get it up to 4,000 acres roughly by, I think, 2032 is the date. But if you look at this bottom line here, we're actually slightly losing ground. Is that statistically significant? There is new survey data from 2023, but it wasn't available in this format with the other ones yet. I've just seen some of the maps from the Long Island Sound study. So there you can see that the first year it was really low in 2002, and they started doing this, and it started going up, kind of stayed the same, went up again, and then dropped off. So the point of this is if you don't have a lot of survey points, you could get the wrong information that things are terrible. You need to have many different survey points in order to say if you're going up or down. And there's a paper here which we're not going to review, but it's by Orth et al. 2010, and Orth is Dr. Orth, one of those legends in eelgrass restoration. And I read this paper because Chesapeake has had some good success with monitoring and with restoring acres of eelgrass. And his recommendations are we should be surveying at least once a year, if not twice a year. Now, if you go back up to what's been going on in the Long Island Sound, the first few years were about every third year we were able to put a survey together. And then there was a 5-year gap between 2012 and 2017. And I think this last one, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, was 6-year gap. 5 or 6, something like that. So, that's not, according to what Orth is saying, that's probably not frequently enough to really get a handle on what's going on with eelgrass trends. And I believe Jamie's put this other reference in here. This is the Northeast Ocean data. This has all kinds of different groups that do surveys up and down the eastern seaboard on eelgrass. So if you really want to get into this any deeper, that's another good resource. We're not going to go over that today. It's just too vast a number of groups. So that's why we do the eelgrass, because it can fluctuate from year to year. It's an important habitat. I'm not going to reiterate why it's important. We've gone over that already. So who's going to do it? How's it going to work? Who's going to pay for it? Who has the trained staff? So we need to look at what our resources are in Long Island Sound. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is involved in doing this flight, is my understanding, Jamie, is that correct? So they're the ones that are going up and doing the aerial flights and mapping out the acreage. And that acreage is a metric that goes into the Long Island Sound study, and that's where those earlier graphs came from. The EPA is also involved in surveying eelgrass, And a lot of times they're doing this as a mitigation. So let's say a dock goes in and they dig up a lot of eelgrass. They want to go in and do dive surveys or whatever method and catalog how much eelgrass is there, how much has been removed, and then have it replaced and then survey that mitigation. So they have protocols for surveying as well. And there was just a training actually with the NER this spring on how to do those and their transects. Again, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of responsibility, and I dealt with this in Alaska. You can't, as far as excavating in water projects, eelgrass is a plant of importance. And so they have, just like wetland delineations, if you're going to be working around a wetland, you need an Army Corps permit. You have to have an eelgrass delineation as well for your project area. And now the state is involved, and I mentioned this before, Kelly, you gave a good presentation on the work that you've been working on with drones and with the state. I don't know if you want to do a quick synopsis for the group.
I could.
Summary.
It would now be the right time.
Yeah, go ahead. Just go ahead and give us a quick overview.
Yeah, it's brief. We've been working on developing a methodology to assess eelgrass using drones, collecting the imagery with cameras on the drone mobile. Not going too high, less than 400 feet. Really good. It's very good accuracy, like a few centimeters. You get really great pictures. There's some difficulties, the criteria has to be right, processing such a large data set over water, there's some challenges, but we've been working out a methodology to collect the data and analyze the data and try to quickly evaluate the eelgrass area. So for our first stab is getting that area delineated, comparing to the hand drawings. And that's what we're working on now, that methodology.
Yeah, so that's actually going on in Long Island Sound right now. So we have the Fish and Wildlife Service aerial, we have this drone work, and then New York DEC. I'm not sure how much they've just hired a seagrass coordinator. I don't think they've been that active yet. Della Campbell is new. So there probably will be some more effort on this. Typically the surveying work is done by the universities in New York, but I just wanted to give Jamie I know your voice isn't great, just a real quick short summary of the work that UConn's been doing over the years.
Yeah, so I think the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service definitely has the aerial surveys, and they have that agreement with now Michael Bradley to do the analysis of it. But the universities, Cornell, UConn, Stony Brook, tend to survey smaller patches. So, like I keep an eye on Mumford Cove and go out there every few years to see what's happening. The Millstone Environmental Lab is out in Niantic River, I want to say 4 times a year. They do one big survey of eelgrass expanse in their sites, and then they also go and sample those eelgrass 4 times a year. So all that to say is that we have these intermittent, Long Island Sound wide surveys, and then we have these surveys that we hope are more frequent. Millstone Lab has the longest record going back, I want to say, to the 80s. Perhaps Deep is going to do recurring drone surveys. I don't know. But there are these kind of intermittent projects that these kind of pet sites, things that we become very fond of, and we as individuals go and survey them and keep an eye on them. We want to formalize that more, both in the Eelgrass Collaborative and kind of all of the agencies. We would like to get to a point where we're surveying more often, even if it is these few sites that we think are indicators. So the drone work that Deep is doing is kind of I look at it as investigating that as a tool for surveying certain sites. EPA is encouraging the reserve, the National Estuarine Research Reserve, to install 2 seagrass net sites. That's a global seagrass monitoring protocol. And then as part of the reserve, we will definitely be putting in some eelgrass monitoring, but for the reserve, that's probably happening, in probably 2 to 3 years before we're actually approved to officially survey under the reserve system guidelines. And that's just because there's permitting and approvals that happen through NOAA. And then we have to do a year and show that we can actually do it before they'll say we're officially able to do it. So that's why we'll start sooner, but it'll be probably 2 to 3 years before our data is, considered verified. Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you're glad you guys are going to have some more. Well, I don't call them pet sites. I call them index sites to make them
That's
sound more
good.
official. But yeah, so that is one thing that we'll look at further down here is that if you can't do a whole comprehensive survey, you can pick representative sites that are smaller so you can get higher frequency, and that can potentially inform what's going on with the greater population.
I'll just add in,
Yeah.
because it's here, I'm pretty sure that the Fishers Island Seagrass Management Coalition, I believe they put in their seagrass net site this past summer. And so I think they are starting to monitor annually.
That's
using that protocol.
fantastic. I was speaking with them before this, and it sounded like they were a lot of what they were doing was people were making comments about how beds were doing in different areas, and they weren't doing that. They were worried about them. They hadn't been surveyed in a while. So that's great that they've got some net sites in there also. To me, that's really important. And here's an example of why it's important. So Stony Brook University with Dr. Brad Peterson, he uses a similar technique that I was trained on at the University of Hawaii when I was out there. And we did it because we didn't do it. We were trained on lava flows because businesses wanted to know which way the lava was going, if it was going to wipe out the 7-Eleven or someone's house, and the USGS maps were sort of rough. So in order to get really good data, they would fly drones, and they flew them every couple of days so people could respond. And they put these big white X's out over the area. And on those white X's, these big white plastic X's, you could see from the drone imagery, they would put a Trimble GPS, which is a surveyor grade GPS, and let it take 10,000 locations and really get it down to sub-centimeter accuracy. And those would be scattered across the survey area. And they didn't use the quadcopters, they used gliders, because gliders can cover a lot more ground and make a much bigger mosaic. And so that's what Brad has these X's underwater, is my understanding, and probably on the shoreline as well. So he's able to go out to his research site that he's been working on for years and fly these drone surveys, is what he was explaining to me. And then he can really get real-time changes in what's going on with his experimental area. And he told me that he uses this software called Pix4D, it's really amazing. It's a cloud-based, it takes hundreds and thousands of location pictures. So what it does is it smashes all the pictures together and you get one big giant image of the eelgrass bed. Similar to what Kelly, you're doing the same style. So that's a really potentially cost-effective way. Hopefully we'll get down into that. So what I wanted to do, oh yeah, and then one other one that I didn't mention is, well, Save the Sound. We just started doing a little bit of surveying to work with the EPA, trying to figure out places where the beds were, when they were flowering, in an effort to collect seeds. We talked about that in other meetings. We don't have an extensive survey expertise at all. And I know Save the Bay has been getting involved in that. They're out of Rhode Island, sort of a sister organization to ours. And so that's the more of the community scientists. So that's one thing, right? So if you have a few bays you can do, the universities have areas where they're looking at, the state has areas, or maybe a way to expand those index sites if we agree to a protocol that everyone will accept as the data is good enough. We may be able to increase the number of sites we can survey. So what if people don't, does anyone have a question on the players? Did I miss anybody, Jamie, on who is involved in this?
Not that I can think of, but I wanted to add a thought that I just had. You know, New York has their seagrass coordinator. Connecticut, through the Connecticut Reserve, has the Eelgrass Collaborative. And the idea of the collaborative is to like bring people together and share information. And that's what New York's seagrass coordinator is supposed to do, is like, you know, coordinate, share information, bring people together. There's just a lot going on with seagrass right now. I just got contacted by Holly Plaisted of the National Park Service, and they're doing like an Atlantic Coast National Park seed project, looking at, you know, seed-based restoration. And she was reaching out because we don't have those national parks in Long Island Sound, and she's like, there's a big gap here. How do we fill it? But I feel like one of our recommendations might be something along the lines of, you know, formalizing coordination for Connecticut. And what does that look like? Is that, you know, continuing support for the reserve to host the Eelgrass Collaborative? Is it someone like Della Campbell, who would sit at Connecticut Deep as a seagrass coordinator? Is that a part-time job? Is it a full-time job? Is it someone at an NGO, which is what Fisher's Island does for their eelgrass management? I just think that, you know, we have the Eelgrass Collaborative right now. It was intended to be funded for 2 years. I think that's what we're down for. Like, that's what we have commitment for, is funding for 2 years, and then it will be reevaluated. So it's not something that's there forever. At least not in a supported way. But that might be something to recommend. And of course, the question is, what does this group think is the best recommendation? Or do we throw out all of those options as, you know, here are different ways to make sure collaboration occurs? It's just, with so much going on, I feel like we have a lot of potential to lose track and lose momentum as we move forward here. So maybe it's not a seagrass coordinator for us, it's a restoration coordinator, and they do multiple things. I don't know what that might look like, but it just occurred to me as you're talking about all of these co-occurring efforts.
Yeah, it's been kind of overwhelming for me, because we just were trying out one method, and all of a sudden we were introduced to this entire world. Though I had seen some of your presentations, Jamie, in the past, in regards to nitrogen effects, you know, and how it was, you know, issues with eelgrass out east. So yeah, so that's fine. I mean, if anybody has another recommendation they think, just throw it out. I'll just drop to the bottom of the document and throw it in there.
So Bill, I don't have a
Yeah.
recommendation, but I just wanted to mention that, just so we're coordinated, that might not really apply here, but that at Deep, we're working also on that flowering survey. And then the EPA is coordinating an intercomparison study, looking at the methods very similar to what's been done in MassBase. So looking at the aerial, the satellite algorithm, drone, and potentially side scan, because we discovered that side scan sonar is available on an UAV as well. So we were interested in looking at that, and that this might be a good opportunity to compare it, just to see, you know, how it compares, how it should be used, and where it would be applicable.
Well, I know which paper you're gonna get assigned then, because the next exercise is so I have what I did is, and there's different ways to break down surveys. I'll run through them really quick, and then we should figure out who is gonna review each one. We're just gonna take, like we did last time, Jamie provided us some links, and we took 10 minutes or so to skim them and then report back to the group our thoughts. In the scientific world, I think this is something that everybody should do when they're trying to answer a question. I just go to Google Scholar, or if you're with a university, you obviously have access to all the like Web of Science and the whole digital library. But these days, there's a lot of open access journals. So if you want to figure something out, instead of going to regular Google and getting news feeds and that kind of thing, just glance at the journals. Even if you're a non-scientist, it's a really good way to get some peer-reviewed information that's not necessarily opinion. I just throw that out there. So there's scuba surveys, there's side scans, sonar transects, what Kelly was just mentioning. There's acoustic imaging. Ooh, is this the wrong one? Yeah, I was gonna get rid of these conclusions. These are what you guys have to come up with. Underwater drone video was an interesting one. There's a UAV, aerial drone, airplanes, satellites, and then these hybrid ones. And then this last one is going to be the story map, which sort of ties this all together. And I think we can have a lot of these same discussions. So let's see, who do we have here today? Who wants to do scuba surveys? Any volunteer? Jamie. It's kind of a weird, this is just a master's thesis. It's a little strange, but it's interesting, you know. And then side scan, that's going to be Kelly. Whoops. Why don't you do acoustic imaging too, Kelly, if that's all right?
That's good.
Underwater drone video. Brad, are you allowed to be assigned anything? I'm just kidding. Who else do we? I can't see who's on right now. What other task force members are there?
We have
here.
Zach, Griff, Craig, and Dave,
Zach.
And Tessa.
and Tessa. Yep. Thank
Zach,
you.
Griff, Craig,
Yep.
and Tessa. Oh, and Dave Carey, right?
Yep.
Okay. So let's go. Dave, you want to do the underwater drone video? You got it. I didn't hear back there.
Yeah, I'll do it. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. I figured that might be interesting for your line of work anyway. The aerial drone, how about Craig? Airplane
Okay.
imagery,
Got it.
that good? Okay. Tessa? Satellite imagery, Zach? And I'll do the hybrid. So just click on those.
Did you get Griff in there?
Oh, Griff. Yeah, oh yeah, Griff. Why don't you do the hybrid? That's like kayak, drone, snorkel comparison. Sorry.
I can do that.
Okay, sorry about that, Griff. And maybe
Bill,
you'll get a job.
Bill, you wrote hybrid instead of Griff.
Oh God, sorry. Yeah, it's been a long day. Okay. All right.
Bill, so you shared this document, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I also put a link to it in the chat. Did I do that? No, I didn't. I have it here though. Hold on.
I only have like the Word version of it. I don't know if there's a Google Doc version of it.
No, they're just links. It's just a Word version and just control click the link. And so all I'm really asking is just kind of look at the abstract and then look at their conclusions. Some of them just have a discussion and just kind of get a sense if it's a viable option for Long Island Sound.
And just to clarify a little, I did put a copy of the document that Bill shared by email. It's in the chat. There's a link to it. That is a link to the document in a Google Drive, but we were not live editing the document. You can live edit that document. That's fine. But
Oh
just to
yeah,
clarify.
I was doing mine, so I'll have to send
Yeah.
this back to you, Jamie. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine. How long do we have, Bill?
How about 10 minutes? Is
Sounds good.
that enough?
Hey, Bill, did you take a topic yourself?
I ran out.
Yep, that's perfect. Do you want to go into the one that's in the Google Drive and just you could update that and then we could add our conclusions directly into that?
Let's do that. Then we don't
Yeah.
have, well, okay. Yeah, I can do that. It's the one in the chat, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. There it is. Beautiful. Oh, I have to ask for permission.
I will fix that. It seems to be my inability to use Google Docs. So give me 2 seconds.
No worries. No worries.
Jamie, do you want us all typing in that same document?
You can. I think that might make the most sense.
Yeah. Then it's one shot deal when I won't have to transcribe it.
Yeah. Okay, I think I made everyone an editor.
Mm. Out of it and come back in maybe. There we go. Is this the Google Doc? I don't think this is the Google Doc. This is the
I think it's as a Word doc, but you can edit it as a Google Doc. Like you can edit in it.
Yeah, mine's not
think.
allowed. It's saying my screen sharing is paused.
Oh, you might need to exit screen sharing.
Just raise your hand when you're done. And we have plenty of time, so take some more time. You need it. All right. How are people doing? Some of you got two, I see. Unfair. Eek. Yep. Okay, I think is everybody done? Looks like they've all been filled in. So I go ahead and share the screen again then. Okay, see what I can mess up now. Whoops. Share screen. Probably this one with the Google. Yep, this looks like the one. Okay. So let's go ahead and run through them really quick. We'll start with Jamie, what the thoughts were on the scuba diver surveys.
To readjust my screen there a little. So this was a thesis, and they looked at largely they were doing some surveys of eelgrass beds using divers, and we're looking at, and when you're doing an underwater survey of an eelgrass bed and you want to continue to survey it through time, you need to get back to the same starting point. So that's what they were evaluating was, you know, what methods are available to use to get you back to that starting point, and how effective are they? They used 3 different ones. They used a compass. So they were swimming from a known location on land out to the bed. And then they used dead reckoning. So that's just a memory of where it was in relation to things around them. So like in reference to the dock versus shoreline, forms that they recognized, so a tree or a rock that they recognized. And then the third was they were trying to develop a pinger and hydrophone that could be deployed at that start point so that you could actually be directed right to that start point. And I think for us, it didn't work out great for them. It was a good attempt, and they had some ideas about how to make it better. But it highlights one of the issues that I think maybe we don't consider for the February report, but I think needs to be considered in the long term. So, so getting back to that starting point is important. And we would like to do it reliably and quickly. And what these folks were doing is what is happening throughout a lot of marine science right now, where there are different challenges to create low-cost sensors. So instead of buying a $50,000 sensor for gas flux, can you buy a 5,000? Can you build one that's 5,000 that is not going to be as accurate or precise as the $50,000 version, but gets you what you need to know? So that's what they were looking at. Can we build a cheap pinger? Because for the cost of this, I did a quick Google search, and to buy a pinger and hydrophone, you're really looking at something in the $7,000 to $10,000 range for something that can stay out there over a year and that you can reliably detect. If we are interested as a community in engaging citizen scientists or community-based scientists in monitoring, then supporting the development of these kind of low-cost, user-friendly options is important. And I think that's what I took away from this thesis as it relates to what we're doing, is that that it's not just go out and monitor, but also continue to think about how do we best monitor? How do we make people the most effective they can be at monitoring or restoring eelgrass? And the last thing I wanted to add there is just, you know, we are focused on eelgrass restoration and preservation, but in order to do that, we have to be able to monitor it over time. And figuring out how to do that in a reliable and repeatable way is very important.
All right, thanks, Jamie. So, and that's really the key of this whole thing. Just this is a recommendation that we want to put together somehow and give to the legislature for consideration of how they may support that concept. Okay, Kelly, you've got a couple.
I do. I went kind of quickly.
That's fine.
So the first item, the side scan sonar transects, that basically the problem identified was that aerial photos and satellite imagery, which had been dependent on to assess eelgrass, was challenging in the shallow turbid estuaries. So they looked at this towfish underwater video camera. Or this towfish, and it was equipped with an underwater video camera, scaling lasers, side scan sonar, and a transponder. So they were able to get the sonar data and the video data and compare that, what the side scan sonar was reading or what they're interpreting compared to what they were seeing in the camera. They used it in 3 locations in New Brunswick, and they mapped eelgrass cover and health, as well as like ancillary bottom features like benthic algae mats. Oysters were also called ancillary bottom features, but just other things that might interfere. They were able to read the side scan sonars to interpret the differences. What's eelgrass, what's benthic algae, or something else or other. And they found that it was pretty good at a cost-effective and useful at the base scale level. And it was sub-meter precision was what they had identified as the accuracy. And they were able to assess eelgrass cover, so the area, as well as the health, depending on, that depended on the epiphyte growth and such, which they could see on the camera. And apparently they were able to get that signal back in the side scan sonar.
So I have a question for UConn. Do you have towfish? Do you have that side scanning capability within the marine program?
So we don't have, I don't know that we have towfish specifically. We do have an older side scan sonar that can be mounted onto shallow boats. The problem is that in the area where eelgrass is located, you need a small enough boat and the side scan sonar to go on it. And the unit we have, I don't know that it was actually used in shallow water. It's probably over 10 years old. So yes and no. There's also some work that's been done on using just the fish finder type scanners, and you can hook a computer up to it and you can like look at the trace and identify eelgrass that way. So there are options, but I don't think anyone in our department is set up for it currently. And I would have to pull out that equipment and see what it looks like, because it is older.
I just mentioned it because I could see a number of uses, especially for what this study was looking at.
Yeah.
Oysters, and you've got abandoned lobster traps, all kinds of things for a new purchase for the marine science program for an up-to-date side scan. But anyway, talking about acoustic imaging, Kelly got that one also. So why don't you give us a summary of that?
All right. Okay. So that one, they wanted to understand the seasonal variation in the eelgrass distribution for conservation purposes. So they also did some other estimates, carbon sink, fixation, potential. But I didn't read into that too far. They used an acoustic monitoring quantitative echo sounder. I'm not too familiar with that. But they conducted the survey 9 times over 3 years. I'm thinking that's 3 times a year. They really wanted to get at that seasonal component. They determined the spatial distribution of eelgrass, and they were able to identify the periods of maximum and minimum growth, spatial variations in eelgrass between where it grew more abundant in some locations versus others. They concluded that the eelgrass distribution coincided with the life history. Distribution differed by area, which I kind of mentioned, and they were able to track the variability yearly. And they thought, due to the effects of bottom characteristics and wind direction. And like I mentioned, they considered other supporting services. And they felt that working this data together, getting the the understanding of the eelgrass, a good understanding of the eelgrass growth and variability, they were able to apply the supporting services and better manage the coastal resources, or better approach coastal conservation.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I mean, if you can do 3 surveys a year easily, just by I mean, I don't, post-processing of this stuff is always a learned art form. And each model is different for this type of thing. I know it more from a commercial fisheries interpretation, using it to try and catch fish. But yeah, it's something to consider, that also the time to go out and get these surveys and repeatability in a shorter time scales definitely gets at what Jamie was talking about earlier, potentially.
Yeah, that's sort of that, special site that you would want to capture that much data.
Yeah, the special site, the pet site, or I call them the index site.
The index, that's a good
Sounds
one.
more
I like that one.
Yeah. So, all right, that's great. Thank you, Kelly, for taking on the double header there. Dave, what did you find out about the underwater drone video?
So, so the underwater drone video, the conclusion was that it had the same percent cover as the diver, so it was very effective. But I'll caveat that, and where they did it in Napa Tree, obviously that's a 2.5 foot of water there, a much more protected environment than many other areas that would be open water, and so it was really effective in terms of accomplishing what they wanted. However, it does have some negative aspects. One is it takes significant skills to control it. And it said, if you were fortunate enough to be a homebody gamer and had a lot of experience, you would hop on this no problem. But if you weren't, it could take you five hours to get it to work. It didn't say master it. So then it also entangled quite often in the eelgrass itself and had to be retrieved and cleaned out. So I'd say that's a little bit of a negative aspect there. The current velocities had a huge impact on it. So in a protected environment where this was, less so than probably in many other areas. So I think, its use would be site selection, and it'd be effective in a lot of nearshore protected areas and then less effective in open areas. And also water clarity was an important part. So they were working on the incoming and slack tides, whereas in outgoing tides, they had water clarity issues that impacted the results. So I think it could have high utilization in nearshore protected environments and less so probably in open water areas.
All right. That's some interesting feedback. Yeah, I know when we were being trained at the University of Hawaii on drones, the lab tech there who flew the glider was obviously a gamer. He could do acrobatic things with that glider when he was collecting the imagery. And part of the training for the Pix4D program, which I mentioned that Cornell uses for their drone mapping, you get a video game that lets you fly gliders and quadcopters on the computer. And we had to do that for a couple of hours before they'd even let us touch the real thing. And it's difficult. It is very difficult to drive things remotely. All right, thanks. Thank you very much, Dave. All right, Craig, you're up.
Okay, so my paper was on the aerial surveys, and basically what they did was quadcopter surveys that were conducted at 15 meters of altitude, RGB spectral bands. It was a short form Zostra bed. The paper had a good flow chart for data acquisition and post-processing. They took the aerial surveys and they ground truthed them with Quadrats. and conducted statistical analysis between the ground truth data and the aerial surveys. So the resulting uncertainty ranged between 9 and 32% for the aerial surveys. And interestingly, the surveys were more accurate at lower vegetation densities. The surveys were successful in distinguishing between macroalgae and seagrass beds. So on one hand, this seems pretty promising, but the thing to remember is this was an intertidal seagrass habitat. So not sure how super appropriate it is for us or how much the accuracy degrades when you start overlaying some water of varying turbidity on top of it. So I think, it's a tool that's used, right? And I think in the right setting, it's probably useful. But because this was an intertidal habitat, it's a little unclear to me how directly applicable some of the results from the study are.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Craig. That I know there was well, we're gonna go into when I get to the last part, I'm gonna go through really quickly the comparative study, the one that Massachusetts did, that it sounds like Kelly's group is gonna be replicating as well. So we'll discuss that in a little more in depth. All right. Tessa, you are up. Uh-oh, Tessa.
All right, can you hear me? Yes, I was
Yeah.
having technical difficulties.
No worries.
And I was still reading because one was easy, it was an abstract, but one was a full article and it was pretty interesting. So, okay. The first one, the study used a low altitude balloon mounted camera, and they were characterizing intertidal eelgrass habitat on a patch scale and a landscape scale. And I'm assuming it was in Canada based on the author's affiliations, but it was just an abstract, so it didn't say where. But what they were trying to do was compare data sets over a 26-month period and look at the patches in order to track those temporal changes. And what they concluded was that at the patch scale, the change in seagrass metrics was consistent with the border expansion, but at the expense of patch density and integrity. So some drawbacks there. But they did say that it was successful in that it allowed for the tracking of those patch metrics through time to depict the change. The only drawback there is that they didn't look at subtidal beds, so I wasn't sure if it was applicable to Long Island Sound. And then on the second study, I didn't add this in there, but I will. They were using solar airplanes, and they carried a hyperspectral airborne, or excuse me, a compact airborne spectrographic imager. This is all a mouthful. And they were assessing the capability of hyperspectral airborne imagery, which I didn't know what that was, so I looked it up. It's a technique that analyzes spectrum of light instead of just the primary colors, and they assign those to each pixel. And so the light striking each pixel is broken down into spectral bands to provide more information on what's imaged. So they sampled the ground. It was a distance of 2 meters. They said the sensor was used to acquire both visible and infrared wavelengths of light. And I know nothing about this, but they said the 10-band combination was the most accurate, but it was limited to moderate and high density seagrass meadows. So I wondered again about the applicability in Long Island Sound. You could get at those areas where we have dense beds, but maybe where we have sparse meadows and you're looking at change over time, that would be more of a challenge. And they also this was a study in Spain. They did this admittedly in the best of conditions. So they said clear conditions, lowest tide, like clear day weather, clear water, and at the lowest tide. That's all I have.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, the spectral using the different wavelengths, infrared and visible spectrums. What what that does is just it puts so each pixel in an image is considered a bin, and those numbers get stacked up. And the machine, like there used to be, I'm turning into a dinosaur here, but I was trained on Imagine software once upon a time down in Salt Lake City. And what the computer can do with those numbers that are in each pixel is make an interpretation of what it is and or interpolate. And they were using it. I was sitting next to an F-16 pilot, and he said, yeah, they developed this so you could tell, how many tanks the enemy had and what kind of tank it was. And he had been using it in coca growing interdiction, where they could tell the age of the coca plants by the radiance that was coming off of it. So they knew when it was ready to harvest, and they would send in an interdiction team. So it's really the machine learning component of something like this. If you can get it dialed in, like you said, if you have the right conditions, there's some ability to potentially automate this. Is it going to be cheaper? Not sure, but it's definitely something we used to play around with at the Forest Service. So I'll stop talking and let Zach go.
All right, so my study was a kind of a comparison of using satellite remote sensing versus traditional field methods to see if you could use satellite imagery to do more widespread eelgrass monitoring. This was in Northwest Canada. Kind of the conclusion they came to is that, so they did this in 3 different locations, and they got pretty varying results that didn't seem to be super encouraging for them. But what they found out is that shallower, clearer water, the satellite imagery did line up to what the field survey said. But when you get into that deeper, murkier, cloudier water, it's not as effective. So again, not so sure how valuable this would be for Long Island Sound per se, but it was an interesting comparison.
So again, another like desktop way of doing this. And there's a common theme here, I think, is Long Island Sound's pretty murky. So either with sediment or plankton blooms, depending on the day. So yeah, that's something we have to deal with all of this. All right, Griff, last but not least.
All right, so my method of mapping was like kind of a hybrid. It was a drone / kayak / snorkel. So what they did is they would take drones to areas of interest where seagrass might potentially be, and they photographed by drone at altitudes lower than traditional airplane photography. And then another method they used was a drone that wouldn't take pictures, but instead would be operated by someone who, if they saw a largely vegetated patch in the water, they would land the drone and go investigate themselves, whether that is by a kayak or snorkeling, so that they could get like an accurate description of what they were trying to find. And then they could also see if it was seagrass or only macroalgae. And they would just, like my third method, whoever, they were taking kayaks out. So what they found is there was no eelgrass beyond a single clump, which was 1.5 feet in diameter, that was found. And I think for us in Long Island Sound, it could potentially be effective for like closer coastal areas, but for the whole of Long Island Sound, I think to have people go out on kayaks wouldn't be super effective because of how much area there is to cover and the amount of time it would take.
Excellent. That fantastic summary, Grip. And I think some of it, you're right, probably wouldn't be effective for a range of things, but as far as a community science group, there may be some hands-on engagement with this style. Okay, so we only have, what, about 15 minutes left, Jamie? So maybe I will just take, say, 4 minutes to run through the comparative study, and then we'll try and come up with some recommendations.
Yeah,
What do you
before we
think?
start that, just to throw this out there, I think listening to all of this, it highlighted to me again that there are so many methods for surveying and understanding the eelgrass status. And maybe in our report, a way to, because our goal for this report is to communicate the kind of current knowledge and the current status of conditions to the legislators and other people that are interested in this, so that non-scientific audience. But I was imagining a table that kind of lists these methods and has some pros and cons with each method, and we might be able to put some dollar signs with them, some, it costs this much, but then also the feasibility of it. Like Griff just mentioned, you're not going to go out and kayak all the beds of the Sound. So kind of like we might do it in such a way that it's not text heavy and more of a reference table almost, just thinking ahead to how we convey this information.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm gonna fix my spelling error. So I'm just gonna go through this really quick. I don't know if I can even do this. Yes, I can. Okay. So this is the story map version of a presentation, as I mentioned before, that was given to the Eelgrass Collaborative, which I thought was really informative. It's with the Office of Coastal Zone Management, and it's through the Project of Special Merit. And you can actually have areas meriting special attention, something to think about for our special or index sites in the future. There may be ways to designate those as core eelgrass and then also get some NOAA funding on the side. Just throwing that out there. So the goal of this was to look at 4 different methods: airplane imagery, satellite imagery, drone imagery, and side scan sonar. So some of the stuff that, as compared to diver surveys, underwater photo ground truthing. So a lot of the stuff we just talked about and read about is gonna, not all of them, but are gonna be in this. And it's all about mapping eelgrass. We can cruise through this. We all know why eelgrass is so awesome. We're going to blow by that. We're going to go by the planning, site selection. So these are the index sites. So the map on the left is the extent of eelgrass around that area between Boston and Cape Ann. And to do the experiment, they picked these index sites, these boxes, and within those, they used these use these transects to do the comparisons. And so again, here's the aerial survey. And it looks like something we did on a cruise ship harbor seal interaction study I once did with the National Marine Mammal Lab in front of a glacier. This is before they had all this neat stuff. We had a laptop fixed to a GPS that was on the dashboard of the plane, like a Magellan, I think it was. And we tried to have videos mounted to the struts like this, and they were vibrating. And finally, we got a beaver that you can remove the bottom and put a still camera, but you had to have it take the pictures at a certain time, so it would all be georeferenced. Nowadays, it's much easier. Looks like Massachusetts has some nice stuff, probably a lot cheaper. And one thing I will mention with surveys is 20 to 50 degree sun angle. That's a big deal. As far as being consistent with your readings, is getting the light right and consistent. So for marine mammal surveys, we always use solar noon because the majority of the animals would be hauled out on the beach, so you get more accurate counts. So anyway, here's the fixed wing. That's kind of how things are done. But then they wanted to get into the field work and compare all this stuff. So 15 diver surveys, 500 underwater photo ground truthing stations. They did 5 drone flights, 1 airplane flight, 5 of Kelly's side scan sonar surveys at these index areas. So I've seen water clarity like this sometimes, but you got to be really far east in the Sound to see this. So that's talking about the diver surveys. But here we get into the photo interpretation. We kind of talked a little bit about the hyperspectral imagery. And you can see, I mean, is this green eelgrass or is it macroalgae? And they're using ArcGIS Pro image, which I'm not familiar with. That's probably way better than what I was trying to do with Imagine, because that was 20 years ago. And I'm not up to speed on this the new remote sensing stuff, but here are the results. So these are the 4 methods: satellite, airplane, drone, side scan. And you can see these are the final products. Kind of grainy satellite. Airplane's pretty good. You can see the eelgrass bed there. These drones, you can actually adjust how tight your pixels are, down to the one I have is not super incredible. It's like 2 centimeter resolution though. That's pretty good for picking out things. And then here's some of the side scan stuff. So this is what came out of the talk, was the errors on the edge, and that's what we noticed a lot in the papers people went over, is that it's hard to get the edge of the bed. So if we're trying to count acres, you know, what's a density? What actually is an acre of eelgrass? At what density do we call it an acre so it meets the metrics we're trying to meet with the National Estuary Program or the Geographic Program? So drone was really good in shallow water. Didn't have a lot of error. Sonar was pretty good. Airplane was okay. Satellite less so. But when you got into the deeper edge of the meadows, which was brought up by a few of you, the error bars get pretty big. So as the eelgrass gets down toward 20 feet, are you really catching the edge of it? Okay. Green, good. White, not so good. This is the overall accuracy of the assessment accuracy, both for the shallow edge and the deep edge. Drone was the best, followed by sonar, followed by airplane, followed by satellite. So keep that in mind for recommendations. And then they got into the patchiness. And I know this is something Jamie's done a lot of work on, you know, how healthy is the blade of eelgrass and how tall is it and all of that. So trying to get at some of that information. There was a lot of error bars here in the mean canopy height. So trying to figure out how tall they were and how much was missed. So they did map a bunch, but with an error bar, and then they all missed about the same amount of that. So that's a tougher metric to get with any of these methods. So I'm not going to put this up here, I was thinking, Jamie. This is the management recommendations from Massachusetts, or do you want me to? Do you want me to put it up, or should we just discuss now?
I think probably a quick discussion in case there's anything we missed is probably the way to go.
Okay. So what are folks' overall thoughts?
So I got a question about, you know, looking at error bars and uncertainty and accuracy, and do we have a good sense of, you know, how good is good enough, right? I mean, ultimately the objective here is to be able to detect change. And how much change is the threshold that we care about? Because I think that question drives what's the level the level of acceptable accuracy, and how do we achieve that? So do we have a sense of, you know, do we only care if like the bed doubles in size, or if it, you know, increases by 10%, or I just don't
Yeah,
really know.
I think it's a really good question, and I don't think we have a good handle on it in Long Island Sound because we don't have the interannual surveys. So our error bars are large. Yeah. The short answer is I don't think we know. I think it's a good question.
I think it's a great
then to
question,
get
Craig.
So then to get to that
Right.
question,
Yeah.
it requires that frequent monitoring data.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's one way you could turn, you know, my inquiry around from a response of I don't know to this is the motivation for X, and X being the increased monitoring frequency.
Yeah, and then what I was gonna say to that, to Jamie's point, was, and if you want that frequency, it's gotta be affordable. So we
Yeah,
want
right.
good enough red, so that's getting back to what's good enough. So we do kind of have to get at that. We don't want to count every blade of eelgrass out there. We need to figure out and I think the index sites can be more precise.
Yeah,
Um,
and I don't think we want to count. Even if we could, I don't think we want to do that because, the interannual variability is beds are going to grow and they're going to shrink. And in other words, then we just end up spending a lot of resources being really, really good at documenting noise.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, I think of Mumford Cove and Niantic River, which are two beds that are extremely variable. They're in the shallow water embayment, so yes, they experience a lot of variability. But sometimes a storm will come through. This happened in one of the aerial surveys. A storm came through and buried all of the eelgrass in Mumford Cove right before the aerial survey was conducted. So it looked like we'd lost all of our Mumford Cove, but I went back later in September and all of that grass had popped back up and was there. So, if you're looking at those big expensive surveys, you have to take that into account. And it's this challenge of what we really want is, where is eelgrass occurring? For me, the question is, are we able to move eelgrass westward? Are we able to maintain the beds that we have, the size and health of them? And that's two different things. There's the size of them, and then there's the health of those beds. How healthy is that eelgrass community? And they require different things. One you can do with aerial surveys, but you have to understand that sometimes your aerial survey is going to show a loss because you sampled the day after a storm. And so it's a false loss. But then for me, it's a combo. We need the big aerial surveys. Ideally, we need them annually. I think everyone in the eelgrass community worldwide says, yeah, annual is the way to go. Just as a little anecdote there, I was on an international seagrass method group, and we're putting out a paper, and we could not include the data that we had from Long Island Sound because we didn't have annual surveys. So Long Island Sound eelgrass is not included in kind of this worldwide trend analysis because we were missing that annual data. And that's generally considered kind of the minimum level of surveying that you want to do, is how much have you got on an annual basis? And then you get into the index sites, like looking at it more specifically and saying, what's the interannual variability of the health of the eelgrass, and perhaps even what is the seasonal variability? And that's where the things like the drones and the acoustic surveys become useful.
Yep, and that's why I got rid of I'm gonna go to recommendations, because that's essentially what the recommendations are.
Yeah.
Is to do the big surveys, accept the errors, accept the unknowns, the roughness of them, both satellite, because it's a desktop exercise, and the aerial. And then there's a number of people in this collaborative that have potentially the capability to keep experimenting to come up with the best index site, fine scale, interannual 3 times, whatever we think we need, and then standardize that across all the bays. So yeah, I think that makes the most sense, because it's just like owning a boat. There's no perfect boat, right? It's always better for one thing than another, and surveys for eelgrass are the same way.
Yeah. And I'll say that the Long Island Sound study and DEEP and New York State DEC already know that annual surveys are better. And Long Island Sound study is always talking about, the working groups are always like, yes, we need annual surveys. So there's no one saying, oh no, every 3 to 7 years is good. But a lot of it comes down to that funding piece, and just not having the funding to support annual surveys. Yeah. which they
Right.
are continually seeking. They are continually looking for ways to do that. But that lack of funding really hampers our ability to understand what's happening with eelgrass in the sound.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's a way to
But
be
so
able to
here's
take the index sites and have them give an idea what's happening in the big realm without, if you can't get the money for the big flight, you still got every year you're doing these index sites. It's kind of like doing spot measurements on a stream gauge, right?
But here's the quandary that gets back to what Craig was saying. Like we want to increase eelgrass in Long Island Sound. Do we put all of our money into monitoring the eelgrass, or do we put our money into putting plants in the water and improving water quality? You know, I think as a community have said, hey, let's put our money towards increasing water quality and putting plants in the ground or seeds in the ground rather than monitoring, you know, this ebb and flow, which we can't do that well anyways because of the interannual variability. So it's a challenge, and I go back and forth on it. You know, do you lobby to put a lot of money into monitoring, or do you find cheaper ways to monitor, like using the index sites, and put your money into actually changing things? Yeah.
That is a good way to put it. And that's why I think we need to use the techniques that are cheaper. And my personal thought is to do them more frequently, but affordably with people who are vested, and maybe get away from any Cadillac survey efforts, and then ask for, you know, my recommendation is to get some kind of ongoing state support for it, whether it's for the Eelgrass Collaborative through the NER, just like New York's doing it. DEC has an eelgrass coordinator that's funded by DEC to keep an eye on all this stuff. So, so how do you want to, with the recommendations, you're just getting all these notes together, Jamie, and then you're just gonna blast out the draft, with all these discussions. Okay.
Exactly. And I think, I was looking at the structure of our document. You know, there is a section on monitoring and change analysis that'll be an overview, and it should provide the background for then the recommendations moving forward. And I don't think we've settled on them, or maybe the recommendations is we recommend all of this, which is not useful to people. Whether it's legislators or NGOs, you need to do like a little cost benefit analysis. And that's where I think that table is going to come in handy to say, okay, here, if you have a lot of money, if you have $5 million, do this. If you have $100,000, do this. You know, that might be the better way to approach these recommendations, is a menu of options at various price points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking as well. I mean, really to roll out the costs to compare what's effective, where the funding is.
Yeah.
And then I think understanding, like, standardizing how we approach it. If we're doing an index site, several organizations are doing it. There's like standard procedures for doing it. I wonder, I think too, you know, do we need to talk about or develop more capacity for, especially the aerial surveys, you know, or any part of this? Is that something that we need, like, more capacity development in?
Yeah, I think yes is the short answer. I think we have the between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their kind of links, we have the capacity to do the aerial surveys, not always the money to do them, but the drone surveys, the side scan sonar surveys, I think that they're showing really good results, but there's no one that can say, yes, I will be the drone person and you can hire me to go survey your eelgrass bed, or like, we're lacking that. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from the group?
Sure. For me, the emphasis, we should always start with water quality, and you know, we're very fortunate that we've seen recovery in portions of Groton and Stonington because of the work that has previously been done by the municipalities in Deep. But if you look at the data coming out of the, you know, the sewage treatment plants, you know, we're at the peak and the trend is going the other way. So, you know, we can spend all this money on equipment to survey, and what we're going to survey is a repeat of, you know, most likely what happened, you know, 25 years ago, if we're not focusing on making sure that with all of this increased development and utilization of houses along our shoreline, that, you know, our sewage treatment plants and our storm drain systems, you know, keep, you know, the benefits that we've seen the last 20 years in place. And I think we saw that this year in Groton, that in Stonington, you know, the exact opposite is happening, and it is a big concern.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. You know, we put a lot of effort into clean water state revolving loan fund and supporting that at the legislature and getting bonding money and, you know, enforcing the Clean Water Act and all that.
And it's been tremendously successful, probably so successful that it's now falling down on the list of priorities, which is really a shame.
Yeah, I will say though, on the stormwater front, there's a lot of action going on with UConn, with Clear and their NEMO education program, have put in for a very large multi-state grant to train a stormwater workforce. Hopefully they're successful with that. Our group is putting one in sort of adjacent to that to create a giant stormwater collaborative, because I think we have gotten a really good handle on the NIPD's permits, and we put a $2-3 billion into upgrading our sewage treatment plants, and New York's put in even more. There's obviously more work to do, but to your point, Dave, is the rainstorms and the ever increasing water temperatures. I always say it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back with our nitrogen wars, because the hotter it gets, you know, we're running into we're going backwards in history a little bit at times. But yeah, no, that's but at the same time, and the reason I got into eelgrass is it's kind of the end product. If we're doing a good job and you can get a patch of eelgrass like the Mumford Cove story to grow, you don't really need to do a bunch of water loggers. If you got eelgrass growing down there, you know you were successful. So that's one of the driving inspirations for me. Any other comments?
I would, I'm just been taking notes as people were talking, and I think, you know, correct me here on this summary, but I think the summary that came out of this is that we need to continue to focus on creating the habitat conditions that support healthy eelgrass.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think we can refer back to what those are. And I think Dave kind of summarized very nicely the concerns about we've hit our nitrogen reduction goal. Hey, but nitrogen's still going up, because of course it is. We're still here in the environment as humans. Okay.
All right. Well, up to you, Jamie. What do you want to do? I guess are we wrapping up?
I think we're wrapping up. We're 10 minutes over. So yes, let's wrap up. Thank you all. And again, I'll be sending out an email probably early next week. Our next meeting, I believe, is the 19th. So I'll see you guys then.
Thanks, Jamie and Bill.
Thank you. Bye.